Hello. Today we're going to talk about some very important events in history and how they affect us now. I know that's a very generic introduction, but let's start out by talking about in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or really, I would just say among Adventists, when Adventists first discovered about the Sabbath. We're going to start about that, and then we're going to talk about something that seems completely different, but I'll explain how these events relate. Okay, so in 1844, Rachel Oakes Preston went to a church she normally doesn't go to. She was a Seventh-day Baptist, and she went to a regular Baptist church to find out what's going on there. Of course, she was in a strange town, so she wasn't able to go to a regular Seventh-day Baptist church. And so there she heard the preaching of Pastor Wheeler. I think that was his title, pastor, maybe reverend, I'm not sure, but his name was Frederick Wheeler, and he preached the Adventist message. He was an Adventist Millerite preacher, and he was all on fire and everything because the message was really powerful, But Rachel Preston couldn't sit still, and she, he was talking about how you got to keep the 10 Commandments, all 10. And so he went, she confronted him, and he's like, don't you mean 9 commandments? I'm really paraphrasing and taking liberties here. But because she said he's not keeping the Sabbath. You're a hypocrite. You're keeping the Pope's Sunday. And she just basically slapped him on the face. And that's how they became the first two Seventh-day Adventists. Because Rachel Oakes Preston received the Adventist message. Wheeler received the Sabbath. Okay? And then Wheeler passed that on to T.M. Preble. Okay? TMP is his initials, and that spells temp, right? The abbreviation for temp. And he was a temp, unfortunately. He passed the Sabbath on to John Evan Andrews and Joseph Bates. And Bates and Andrews were keeping the Sabbath based on his teachings. But then Preble gave it up. Like I said, he was a temp, and he went back to Sunday. Anyway, so then Joseph Bates, they started keeping the Sabbath in 1845. By 1846, Joseph Bates passed the Sabbath on to James and Ellen White. So they were keeping the Sabbath based on Bates' teaching. Sabbath starts at 6 p.m. Well, obviously, because then everybody keeps the Sabbath at the same time, right? And 6 p.m. has something to do with like the sunset and the equator or something, because he was a sailor, right? So he understood about equatorial time and stuff like that. Anyway, so actually Bates believed Ellen White's visions because Ellen White described the planets, and Bates knew about the planets. Ellen White didn't, but that came out in vision. So anyway, then so they're all keeping the Sabbath together, starting at 6 p.m. like normal. But in 1855, they ran into some people that were keeping the Sabbath at sunset. And they didn't just say, hey guys, I'm sorry, we can't accept you into fellowship because we've already voted when the sun sets. No, they weren't like that back then. They had an open mind. They're like, maybe we've been wrong the whole time. Who knows? I mean, anything's possible. So they had all this discussion about it. They just couldn't decide. They couldn't settle it, So they had to call in an expert. I think Loughborough was there, James and Ellen White obviously were there. Joseph Bates was there. So they had to call in an expert. They had to call in a person. See, they couldn't just Google stuff back then. They didn't have computers and stuff. So they had to find the person who has more knowledge than anybody they knew about the Bible. A person who practically memorized most of the Bible. And who is that person? You might guess that's John Evan Andrews. He was only 25 years old at the time. But yet, he had more knowledge than anybody they knew. So it seemed to me like Ellen White had the gift of prophecy, Andrews the gift of knowledge. So they wrote to him and said, I think James White wrote him a letter and said, Andrews, show us from your Bible when the Sabbath starts. And Andrews wrote back and gave 9 verses from the Bible that says, the Sabbath starts at sunset. Wherever you're at. So it's going to start at sunset in New York, and then you're still waiting for sunset if you're like in Kansas or something, and then it starts sunset for you like a couple hours later, and then a couple hours later after that, then it starts in California, and it goes all the way around the world like that. So anyway, so they're like, okay, and they accepted it. except for 2 of them. Which, guess who? Of course, Bates, because Bates was the guy teaching them this. And you'll never guess, Ellen White. Ellen White had a hard time accepting that as well. So here's the thing. I've said all that as an interesting little fun fact, basically to focus on Andrews. Andrews was a brilliant person. He learned other languages and stuff. He taught his kids learn other languages when they did missionary work in France. And they all spoke France, and French. And the tragic thing is, Andrews failed to take Ellen White's counsel to remarry after his wife had died in 1879, so he died a few years later. You don't fail to take the prophet's advice, at least. God isn't telling you to marry a harlot like Hosea, for instance. So, that's unfortunate. But we have a lesson that we can extract from that. Make sure you take Ellen White seriously. And I would say also take Andrews seriously. Now, Andrews lists 9 things that are the wine of Babylon. He talks about the wine of Babylon, how it's corrupted Christian doctrine. This is an important part of our message. Babylon has fallen because it makes all nations drunk off our wine. So the nations are insane. He says that the church is the light of the world, but the word is the light of the church. So if the church corrupts the world, then instead of giving light, it gives corruption. It makes people insane instead of sober. Like when Paul says, these are not the words of madness. I'm not a lunatic here. Festus, I believe, said that Paul was mad because of much learning. And he says, no, these are the words of soberness. Okay? And so this is not madness. Okay? The Bible, Ellen White says, the religion of Christ is sincerity itself. Okay? But the foolishness that goes on, let me just explain this. Okay, so he lists 9 different things that are the examples of the wine of Babylon. Now, there's all kinds of stuff he could have listed. There's stuff like the Eucharist and chanting and stuff. Instead of following what Jesus says, don't pray in vain repetition. But here's the 9 things he listed. He listed 9 things, starting out with the immortality of the soul. Oh man, there's so many people murdering other people, thinking they're sending them to a better place. 2, the Trinity, which destroys the personality of God. Now, I'm talking about 2 opposing doctrines. This, if I can fit it in. The Trinity, personality of God. 2 opposing doctrines, okay? Immortality of the soul versus the resurrection, right? The corruption of the baptism by immersion, or by sprinkling instead of immersion. Okay, that's number 3. Number 4 would be the Sabbath, change the Sabbath to Sunday, right? 5 would be 1,000 years of peace instead of 1,000 years of desolation. 6 would be saints' inheritance beyond time and space instead of the earth made new. 7 would be the spiritualization away of the second coming of Christ instead of a literal second coming of Christ. 8 would be slavery. 9 would be, because back then slavery was a serious issue. 9 would be lowering the standard of godliness. Okay? Lowering standards, right? So you might be saying, wait a minute, didn't you just say Trinity? Didn't we vote to accept that? Sure we did, but not back when Ellen White was alive, okay? And so it's not one of those things that's really certified by inspiration. Yeah, yes, our doctrines come from the Bible, but Ellen White's visions verify the doctrine. Every one of our doctrines in 1905, Ellen White says our doctrines have been established in the last 50 years of the movement. So that would start in 1855, right, to 1905. And that's when Andrews said these things, right? Okay, so this is one of the things that we've had a difficult time talking about, and I think that we should go ahead and talk about it more. I know you're going to have to disagree with the church leadership. If they have hardened their hearts in something that doesn't come from God, then that's unfortunate for them. I wasn't there when that happened, okay? Now, I would love to just remind our church leadership that Satan has hurt them. Satan has broken in. We're supposed to be called the repairers of the breach. Restores the paths that dwell. And those paths go places, right? But we're not going places because our paths are all jacked up. And we're not even safe in our home because our walls have been breached. We got to fix it. So let's talk about it. And it's going to take a lot of work to repair that breach. It's going to take more material than the rest of the wall is built with. It's going to take time. You got to guard the breach because that's where the enemy is going to come in. Okay? So we're going to talk about that a little bit in part 2. Thank you very much.